From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis and Josh Nelson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Sox Machine Podcast. I'm Josh Nelson, alongside the managing editor of SoxMachine.com. It's Jim Margulis, as we are recording this late Thursday night on December 15th, 2022. And we're doing this, and the timing of these podcast episodes, especially with the holidays, please bear with us. They're not going to be on the regular schedule here because we're trying to time it in case if there's any big Chicago White Sox news. But we're fools for hoping that, Jim, because that may never come, it feels like.
Yep.
But there's been a lot of moves made in Major League Baseball, and that's where we're going to be spending a lot of our time in this episode, just talking about what is going on in free agency. Some old friends have signed with new teams, and I think a good place to start is how we are doing in the free agent pick'em contest. So again, we recorded that episode on my birthday on November 16th. I picked out 10 players that would try to make our best guesses on where they're going to be signing. And Jim's been crushing it. And taking a look at where we are now after some pretty significant free agent signings. First of all, and we'll talk about this more in depth, old friend Carlos Rodon did not sign with the Baltimore Orioles, Jim. He ends up signing with the New York Yankees for a 6-year, $162 million contract. So both you and I had the Orioles. Our friend Beefloaf had the Yankees. He's trying to catch me right now. And he's hoping that our last free agent that hasn't signed out of our pick'em contest, Dansby Swanson. You have the Minnesota Twins. I have the Chicago Cubs. And Beefloaf has the Atlanta Braves. I don't think the Orioles are going to be part of it. So our friend Chirizi is probably going to finish 1 for 10. But you have an additional X on your free agent pick'em. Adam Frazier ended up signing with the Baltimore Orioles. We'll talk more about that signing later in the show when we look at the second base situation for the Chicago White Sox. But I guess we could start with the Carlos Rodon signing. Just 2 years ago, nobody really wanted him, Jim, after he got non-tendered by the Chicago White Sox. And in the free agent pick'em, we thought a move to Baltimore could make sense. They need some elite starting pitching if they're going to be serious about contending in the American League East. Instead, he ends up signing with the New York Yankees for 6 years, $162 million. Are you surprised by the contract?
Not really. I mean, not after what Jacob deGrom got, not after the AAV for Justin Verlander. The money has been there. Rodon had the qualifying offer attached to him, so that made it a little bit different and might have muted it a bit, but a lot of teams should have wanted him. A lot of teams have the money and can absorb the risk to, have to deal with a setback or, kind of pitching injuries that pop up here and there. And the Yankees were probably as well equipped as anybody. I guess I'm a little surprised at the Yankees because they did sign Aaron Judge as well. So it does seem like they're back to spending what they had before. The Orioles seem like now it looks foolish to say the Orioles could have signed Rodon because it looks like they're not signing anybody. And I think if I were an Orioles fan, I'd be pretty miffed right now in terms of what did we do all this intentionally awful losing for? I mean, the White Sox lost hard. The Orioles lost hardest. Like they really bottomed out. They have a great farm system. They have a lot of cheap players either in the lineup or on the way. They have a lot of outfielders to deal. Like they have a lot of flexibility with what they can do. And they've been completely absent from the top of the market when it seems like they can. So that's really rough. So, I mean, when I think it was Treasy had Dansby Swanson, right, to the Orioles.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, that's kind of, if Rodon doesn't go there, that's a possibility because they have outfielders, but they're shoring up their infield and they could be players, but they've been completely absent from the conversation while the, Blue Jays have loaded up and the Red Sox, well, I don't know what the Red Sox are doing, but the Yankees are there. So it's just the Rays are always tough. So this seemed like with the Red Sox a little bit uneven and the Rays always at risk of their stuff not working. It seemed like this was the year to maybe make that push for Baltimore and just nothing, silence. So I don't necessarily feel, bad for picking them. I feel bad for Orioles fans who probably should have had some expectations that they would be in for one of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to build off an 83 and 79 win team, surprising most in Major League Baseball with how well they played. And their payroll is so low and they have so much young talent. If they got themselves an ace like Carlos Rodon, maybe they could seriously challenge the Tampa Bay Rays and be part of the conversation of maybe being a fifth or sixth seed in the postseason this upcoming year. And again, we saw in the National League last year, the 5 and 6 seeds can go deep into the postseason with this particular format if you can get out of the wild card round and win that series on the road. So it is a bit disappointing for Baltimore, but for the New York Yankees now, Jim, I mean, gosh, Garrett Cole, Carlos Rodon. I like Nestor Cortez Jr. I think he is also a very good pitcher. They still have Luis Severino. If Severino could prove to stay healthy, and they have Frankie Montas, then all of a sudden, like 1 through 5, the New York Yankees are really strong. The Toronto Blue Jays also signed old friend Chris Bassett, and the Blue Jays rotation 1 through 5 is really strong. And with Rodon now pitching out of the Bronx, I'm wondering what kind of facial hair he's going to have with the New York Yankees, if he'll be clean shaven or try to have a mustache like Nestor Cortez Jr. But that type of arm at Yankee Stadium to really try and squash opposing left-handed hitters, to try to take advantage of that short fence, this, I think, is an ideal pairing between Rodon and the Yankees, Jim.
Pretty much. Like, not many better places for a lefty to go, unless like he gives up some fluke opposite field, right-handed shanks, which supposedly they were getting more of because of the baseballs that were there. We'll see if the baseballs are taken out of circulation. The more lively ones are the Goldilocks balls that the story in Insider came out with, just the unevenness of the actual playing object. And now you can kind of look a little bit askance at Aaron Judge's season, or at least the extent that he led the league, no fault of Judge himself. But assuming that comes down a little bit to normal and they're playing with an average baseball, it would seem like, it's unless the opposite field home run returns the way it had like pre 2022, there's really no flaws to be found with that pitcher ballpark pairing. Like, there aren't going to be many lefties going after him, and nor should there be, given the slider that he has.
Now, with Carlos Rodon going to the Yankees earlier this week, the big news, and this broke at like 1 a.m. Central Time, Carlos Correa signs with the San Francisco Giants for a 13-year, $350 million contract. And to me, Jim, at least with the years, it makes sense, because if Trey Turner and Xander Bogaerts, who are a year and a half, 2 years older than Carlos Correa, are getting 11 years, I would assume, at least from Correa's camp, who's represented by Scott Boras, that any team participating in these sweepstakes would have to offer an at least 11-year contract to be in the running. And the San Francisco Giants decided to take it one step further and go 13 years and paying him $350 million guarantee to be their long-term shortstop in the Bay. What do you make of this signing? As the Giants obviously were going after Aaron Judge, but this ends up being a pretty good backup plan, going now and signing Correa.
It seemed like the sensible thing to do, just with the way their offense struggled to provide power. I think that's why Judge made sense. And, when we briefly thought that Arson Judge was going to the Giants, and I thought, oh, there's my, there's you getting into the free agent pick'em, and like, that probably flips the, it'd be a lot closer now if that decision flipped. But that made all the sense in the world. And then they gear down to Correa, and Correa, given that he's younger, given that he's a normal sized human being, as opposed to Judge being 6'7", and the studies of just how poorly tall players age, it would seem like that's probably the better contract, or at least, maybe it doesn't have the kind of short-term impact that Judge has, the ability to carry an offense the way he did for the Yankees, but Correa can do the, all-around job just as well. And probably after like year 4, I'm guessing that's when you'll see like the some separation between the two, assuming like Judge doesn't or Correa doesn't have like the back issue that had, kind of sidelined him like 4 years ago. Like it seems like he's gotten past it at the point where it's on active concern, but it just takes something like that to really change the trajectory in a way that's, I guess concerning, or at least, be somewhere you consider it chronic again versus a one-off thing. So I like it. It's certainly a contract length that people can, smirk at and say like, well, it's gonna be interesting to see what it looks like in age 38. But good teams, or teams with ambition, teams with deep pockets, teams that feel like they can replace talent elsewhere in on the diamond, really don't have to worry about that. Really don't have to worry about like the inefficient contract to a guy who's gave them so much over the first 5+ years of it.
And with Correa going to San Francisco, I know a lot of people are going to mention that at that ballpark in San Francisco, it's a huge ballpark. It's not very hitter friendly. So let's see on the type of offensive numbers that Correa puts up with San Francisco. But he's never been one to be known, Jim, as a home run leader in either league. He'll get you 20, 25 home runs, but he's such a excellent all-around player. He's still very good offensively, but defensively you get a pretty big boost. And I'm wondering what position the Giants are going to have Brandon Crawford play as he moves off a shortstop and he's getting into his mid-30s. And where if he's going to be the third baseman with Evan Longoria now leaving San Francisco, or he moves over to second base, that's going to be pretty interesting. But for those Giants teams that have been so successful in the past, they've been solid defensively. And what we saw in 2022, especially in that series in San Francisco where the White Sox swept the Giants, in that weekend before 4th of July, it was, oh my gosh, someone's worse on defense than the White Sox. Mm-hmm. The Giants were really bad on defense.
Yeah.
And now here they add Carlos Correa, and that is a huge shot in the arm, at least defensively, for the San Francisco Giants. And they made some interesting moves in the starting pitching front. They signed Sean Manaea and Ross Stripling to help bolster the rotation and back up Logan Webb. But if they could really shore up that defense, and if they could help with the development or at least bounce back on the pitching side, especially the starting pitching side, I can see the path of the Giants going back to the model that worked for them, that won 3 World Series in the past, in the sense of just being incredibly strong defensively, really tough to score runs on, and very timely hitting. And Carlos Correa kind of fits that mold.
Yeah, it was funny when I was going through the Bill James handbook, this year's edition, for a post I wrote on Thursday morning. Going through the defensive numbers, the White Sox were the only team that did not have a position that was positive in defensive runs saved. They had 0 at third base, but they were in the red everywhere else. But down there on the list, the Giants were a company, and yeah, it was over the course of the year. Like, I just assumed the Giants were okay at defense because they've always been good at being, or they've always been good in the margins. Like the offensive numbers are never staggering. Sometimes you get some great pitching performances like Tim Lincecum when they were winning World Series, and they got Carlos Rodon last year. But otherwise, it just seems like they get some surprising pitching performances because the defense is so good and the ballpark is also friendly that boosts some numbers a bit. And when it comes to like just the biggest shortcomings last year, the offense was down, but the defense, yes, was ugly and probably White Sox grade bad in terms of just how it affected games, how it swung games that they should have been able to win or should have high leverage situations, high leverage mistakes. So yeah, you would expect Correa to help massively in that regard. And if Crawford gets shifted out somewhere around the diamond and gets in position where, like, okay, he doesn't have to be the sensational defender that he was, like Gold Glove caliber shortstop, but maybe he can, some of those skills transfer over to be a Gold Glove caliber second baseman, especially if it's a case where with shifts being eliminated, that all of a sudden range is now at a premium for the infield positions that maybe could have been masked as positioning got more advanced and defense, just the thought behind it became more sophisticated. So yeah, there should be a kind of a trickle-down effect to watch. Yeah, there may not be a trickle-down effect, but just it's one of those cases where, as we learn what the absence of shifting creates, I want to see what happens here with just how a previously great shortstop like Crawford, might have a second life at second base at slightly down the defensive spectrum, but be in a position to, add, runs saved in this new environment.
So for those that are watching on YouTube, which for this particular podcast, we've uploaded this episode to our YouTube channel. I'm bringing up a graphic on the free agent signings of 5+ years. And you can add Carlos Rodon now to this graphic with him signing a 6-year contract. So the premium shortstops, there were 4 entering this free agency class. Correa, 13 years. Trey Turner, 11 years. Bogarts, 11 years. Aaron Judge got 9 years. These guys are signed until their age 40 or beyond season. Brandon Nimmo, going back to the Mets, we thought that would be a good fit for the White Sox. The Mets went 8 years. 8 years on Brandon Nimmo. So there was no chance the White Sox are going to be involved. And then you even have some interesting 5-year contracts. At the very beginning, before free agency started, the Mets re-signed their closer Edwin Diaz to a 5-year contract. Jacob deGrom got 5 years from the Texas Rangers. And Wilson Contreras is switching uniforms from the Chicago Cubs to the St. Louis Cardinals. And he got 5 years. And what's interesting as far as this point, and this was a column from Ken Rosenthal in The Athletic, and what Ken Rosenthal was alluding to is that these teams with these particular contracts, these monster contracts, they might have found a luxury tax loophole, Jim. With the amount of money divided over the amount of years, that's what is actually counted against your luxury tax. And you can play with it. If you want to front load it, if you want to load it up in the middle, and then have it tail off later in the contract, you can do that. But what it counts against the luxury tax is the total amount of salary divided by the amount of years. So when you look at Carlos Correa's contract of $350 million over 13 years, that's still shy of $30 million a season. And Carlos Rodon, who, if he signed like a 3 or 4 year contract, I think would have signed for more than $30 million a season. Instead, his luxury tax salary for the Yankees for the next 6 seasons is just $27 million. What do you think about this particular strategy by the big spenders, Jim? Because I think Ken Rosenthal makes a good point. And this is where, in our previous conversation about the dying middle class of Major League Baseball, and you alluded to the fact that Major League Baseball may revert back to the 1990s, Jim, in which the small market owners band together, and now you have this rift between the small market and the major market teams in Major League Baseball, or the ones that spend very little and the big spenders, because San Diego is a smaller market, but they are big spending. That these big spenders committing this amount of years and willing to do it to help them later on have these high quality players on their roster, but it alleviates the luxury tax in the future, makes them even more affordable. I think this is a pretty smart strategy, and one that Jerry Reinsdorf will never take advantage of, Jim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a case where both sides seem to get what they want. Maybe Correa doesn't make the $30 million a year salary, which is a nice round number. Same thing with like Rodon that he might have made on a shorter deal. And I'm thinking like the Trevor Bauer betting on himself type situation before he became kind of persona non grata. But, I think maybe the players lose a little bit in terms of AAV and just maybe if they're looking at that. But when you look at the top players getting Correa getting $350 million, being the last contract he ever signs, probably being a case where he already bet on himself once and doesn't want to have to do it again anytime in the near future. Now he doesn't have to do it again any point in his career. Seems like it's pretty fair for both sides. And, it's hard to complain. I think if you were looking at it as a pro union side and say it's a mild trade-off, but everybody's happy with the contracts. I think they have to be. And like I said, if anybody's, bemoaning the development. It's probably those dozen so teams that just have no interest in spending and are really just taking the luxury tax. Maybe there's a case where it's just there's a little bit more money they're getting because of the luxury tax overages, but we haven't seen that money being reinvested. They're not going to be competitive on these kind of contracts. But it does remind me a little bit, maybe they're taking a note from the NHL, like last decade when Marian Hossa got the 12-year deal, and Ilya Kovalchuk got a 17-year deal that was nixed because at the end of it, he was making like $500,000 in the last couple of years of it. And it was clearly an attempt to game the luxury tax and skirt the salary cap. So it was a case where that was ultimately slashed down to 15 years. But even then, that was a huge and lengthy and very much intended to game the system. And it makes sense. Like in this case, Correa, it's a little bit, front loaded or middle loaded. And at the end, it tails off a little bit for some of these deals, but the money's still there. They're big money teams, with deep pockets, using all of those pockets to get deals done. And, most teams can do something like this, especially as we talked about, the White Sox in previous years should have 9 years and $222 million for Bryce Harper suddenly looks enviable in this scenario. And then that's what the Phillies owe him from here on out. George Springer would be $490, and that's fine for him. So the White Sox missed their opportunity to spend big, because now we're seeing what it looks like when there's actual big money, old money, in some case, like nouveau riche teams like the Mets, all of a sudden paying up for guys and using the money they could have spent all along. The White Sox had a window. They didn't take advantage of it. And now they have to figure out their next idea after these contract extensions lapse for Moncada and Anderson and Jimenez and Robert and so forth.
Do you think it will ever get to the point for the smaller market teams or the smaller spenders that they demand in the next CBA there is a cap in contract length, that they do not allow 11 or 13-year contracts, that the max amount of years a player can sign, let's say hypothetically, would be 10 years? Do you think it would ever get to that with Major League Baseball?
It could. I mean, that could be one of the wedge issues that the CBA creates, and the union can press the owners on to get something else. That's a really touchy issue, I think it's going to be. And that's why I wondered, in this year where there's labor peace for the next 4 seasons, and there's this TV money coming in and there's streaming money coming in, if maybe this is just a one weird year before the owners ratchet it down again and say okay, let's, we had our fun. Now we have to cooperate a little bit more in order to not have this kind of simmering issue explode on them, because it is something that the players can really press. If it's 10 teams at the top and 12 teams at the bottom, and then you have the middle class that we talked about that's kind of dying a little bit, but could get their acts together. There are some teams that could spend and might, especially after this wave of huge spending, record-breaking spending recedes a little bit, that these other teams could get involved. That's, I think, where we might see a little bit of this tension ease. But if it doesn't, if this is the way the game is played, then it's a potentially dangerous issue among the ownership, because it is something that if teams don't care what players are getting paid in age 39 seasons because they can deal with uncomfortable situations for 3 years, I don't see any reason why they'd go back in a free agent class like this.
Well, there's more to discuss in this episode of the Sox Machine podcast, as we're going to be talking about Adam Frazier signing with the Baltimore Orioles. Not a big blockbuster signing, but it does raise the question as another second baseman comes off the board. What are the Chicago White Sox planning to do at second base? We'll talk about that and also take a look at the best remaining free agents, at least on the position player side, next on the Sox Machine podcast after a quick word from our sponsors. The holidays are quickly approaching, so it's time to start thinking about what you are going to gift your loved ones. And if you're looking for something to get even the hardest to shop for, look no further than a personalized coffee subscription from Trade Coffee. And Trade Coffee, if you don't know by now what Trade Coffee is, It is a coffee subscription service, and it makes it so simple to discover new coffees and make your best cup of coffee at home every day. Trade partners with the nation's top-rated independent roasters to send you coffee they know you'll love and fresh to your home and on your preferred schedule. Whether you already know what you like or new to specialty coffees, like me, and need some help, Trade makes it easy and convenient to discover new coffees. And I really enjoy our coffee subscription and getting the little red bag from Trade and wondering what's inside, which roaster sent me coffee this time. And recently I just got one from a roaster in Nashville that's right by Jim's house, and Jim's like, the coffee is not only great, and it is great coffee, but you should get the biscuits sometime when I'm in Nashville. And now it's got me going to the Google Maps, saving their location, so the next time I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, I can get a cup of coffee from that roaster and enjoy one of the breakfast biscuits that Jim makes me insanely jealous of on social media. What's great about Trade, getting all of these different types of blends of coffee from roasters across the country, is what makes it a perfect gift for loved ones. They make it easy with their digital gifting options for last-minute shoppers like myself, and they also have coffee and equipment bundles for something under the tree. So for the coffee lover in your life, or treat yourself with Trade Coffee. Right now, Trade is offering our listeners a total of $30 off a subscription and access to a limited time holiday specials at drinktrade.com/socksmachine. That's drinktrade.com/socksmachine for $30 off. Again, that's drinktrade.com/socksmachine. Welcome back to the Sox Machine podcast, as now we shift gears for the Chicago White Sox, taking a look at the second base. So at the beginning part of this podcast, we're talking about other things that are happening in Major League Baseball. Old friend Carlos Rodon signs with the Yankees. Carlos Correa signs with the San Francisco Giants. And Jim, when we did our free agent pick'em, as a reminder, your big free agent signing for the White Sox, you had Adam Frazier signing with the Chicago White Sox. That ends up not being the case, as Frazier signed a one-year contract for $8 million to the Baltimore Orioles. So unfortunately, that doesn't come to fruition. It's not a big signing, Jim, but it does raise the question now for the Chicago White Sox about second base. Colton Wong was an idea that I had. He got traded to Seattle. Adam Frazier was an idea that you had for second base. He signs with Baltimore. And the options are starting to dwindle here for the White Sox, at least in the free agent market. And honestly, logical trade targets for the second base position. Here we are on December 15th recording this episode, and spring training is going to start in a couple of months. What do you think the plan is at second base for the White Sox right now?
Seems like right now, if I had to bet, it would be on internal options. Like, I don't know if there's one favorite among them. For the record, I was not like thrilled about Adam Frazier. I made that pick a little bit tongue in cheek, but also not like talked myself into it after originally, mocking it. But no, like Frazier, I didn't really want, just because it's the same thing. As long as Larry Garcia is on the books, making what he makes for as long as he makes it, every other utility player they sign for a significant amount of money just compounds that mistake. Like we saw Josh Harrison, like all of a sudden you have like $11 million for utility guys. It's a multiplier for a position that really isn't that important. So now you'd have like 13 million if you had Frazier and Garcia on the roster at the same time. And based on the way that Frazier played for Seattle, like barely a one-win player, and not really going to provide much in the way of power, and so he's like Josh Harrison, susceptible to real slumps with medium contact. That just it didn't strike me as a great fit in theory, but it struck me as like the kind of fit the White Sox seem to like, wider than deep when it comes to production. Second base, I think right now, I'm surprised when looking at the top 10 prospect lists that are coming out, that Lenyn Sosa ranks so low. Like he's 10th on Baseball America. He's 11th on Baseball Prospectus, which is funny because I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I want to say he was 10th on Baseball Prospectus. Like he had ranked higher despite accomplishing far less. Yeah. And there are different guys, evaluating prospect lists for Baseball Prospectus. So, Ben Spanier, who did this year's list, he shouldn't be like, held responsible for what somebody else thought years earlier. But, I think I'm more bullish on him than, maybe prospect rankers, just because like he can play second base. He has the ability to adjust after a really rough initial period at a level. Like he did it at, low A, high A, double A. Like this has been a trend where he needs 1 month of struggles and then eventually figures it out. So I think at the major league level, he might not accomplish the heights that he did at double A, but I think he could be adequate. So like, I'm not as opposed to the idea of running with him if they make a more ambitious play to solve a corner. If you have Eloy Jimenez being, most time DH, and you have Oscar Colas being like a solution to right field, okay, that's fine, but they still need left field. Like, I'm not comfortable with, Gavin Sheets being like a primary corner outfield. I'm not comfortable with like Oscar Colas being there and like nobody behind him for help. So it would seem like if they put their resources for a corner spot, fine, that's okay. Then I can roll with having Sosa there, Romy Gonzalez, Garcia, like just cycling through enough internal options to see what sticks. Jose Rodriguez might be an option. Like, give him a couple months in the minors to get over the Hammond injury to see where he is. Don't make him. I would make him like plan H when it comes to opening day, but he could be there eventually. Like, I could see a case where you just kind of roll with options, just keep going with it and hope that one of these guys sticks to be like the kind of average player, even slightly below average player, can play the defense that you need from the position. But yeah, it's not inspiring at that position itself.
And again, Rick Hahn did say that the trade market will be more fruitful than free agency for the White Sox, and we're still waiting. The Milwaukee Brewers have made 4 trades during this offseason. And the White Sox have yet to make a trade. Everything has been through free agency for the White Sox or the Rule 5 draft. That's how they have added so far to their roster. So we're still waiting, and the White Sox front office and some beat reporters have been writing, stressing patience from everyone involved for the Chicago White Sox and making a trade. But when you do look at what they have available to trade or what they're willing to part in a trade, I just don't know on how they address the second base position via trade anymore, Jim, unless they do move like we've talked about in the past. Like, if they could strike a deal with the Los Angeles Dodgers to send Liam Hendricks to LA and maybe get somebody like Michael Busch, who is a highly touted top 100 prospect that is ready to contribute in the major leagues, bats left-handed, plays second base, maybe not a great defender, but he is more known for the bat, and we know the White Sox need more offense. But with the Dodgers here, and this is a nice segue to our next talking point here, and where we're going to end the show, is where we are right now in the position player front for free agency. So after Carlos Correa signs, there's one more premium shortstop, and that's Dansby Swanson. And when you look at the best remaining position player free agents and using the Steamer projections from Fangraphs.com, Dansby Swanson is number 1 as the best player available with a projected WAR of 3.2 for the 2023 season. Now, for those that are watching on YouTube, you'll see that Omar Narvaez is number 4 on this list. He just signed with the New York Mets right before we started recording this podcast. So he's no longer at number 4. And you mentioned the White Sox invested more resources in addressing the outfield. The third best player remaining free agent, according to Steamers, Andrew Benintendi. But there's word that the Yankees and Astros are both interested in Benintendi, so that could really escalate or inflate, I should say, the type of contract that Andrew Benintendi ends up signing, and he may be too expensive for the White Sox. But there are 2 players that I see on this list that are in the top 5 best remaining position player free agents that intrigue me. One is Elvis Andrus, and we know he played really well for the White Sox late. And his Steamer projected WAR is 1.9. And we can put into reality the hypothetical we talked about at the end of the season, Jim, of what if Andrus moves over to second base and Tim Anderson stays at shortstop, and that's your middle infield. But number 2 on this list is former Philadelphia Phillies second baseman Gene Segura. And Steamer has a projected WAR value of 2.6 for Gene Segura for the 2023 season. What do you think about that possibility, Jim, of the White Sox investing a little more than maybe $10 million for a season to bring Gene Segura to the South Side to help solidify the second base position?
I would be okay with it. Like, it wouldn't thrill me just because like he's one of those players like who kind of similar to, he's like Adam Frazier plus or something like that, where like doesn't strike out much, doesn't walk much, runs a little bit, hits for a little power, hits for a decent average, although that's falling a little bit, but plays an erratic style of play, which I think is like a little bit out of control, as we saw in the postseason, for better or for worse, like makes things happen, but also, I guess, makes some things happen that you don't want to see. I kind of see like Elvis Andrus on the other end of being like the more buttoned down version of that player. Like he's somebody whose bat can disappear, but he'll play steady defense and pretty smart base runner and generally does all the little things well. It's just more of a matter of the bigger things, like the bigger production. Like Segura, offers a little bit more in terms of offensive upside, at least historically. What Andrus did last year for the White Sox was amazing. And it seemed like almost designed to show like, oh, imagine if the White Sox were actually competent in other regards, what kind of difference Andrus could have made. But unfortunately, like the flaws were too strong. But that's kind of how I look at these two players. The problem, I think, is when the White Sox sign somebody like Segura or they sign someone like Andrus, with hopes of solving a position with adequacy, like just, hoping for like it's 2 wins. We don't need much from this guy, like a 2-win player, like somebody will hit 270 and have an OBP of 310 and hit double-digit homers. That's when they get the performance that kind of craters on them. Like they hope for 2 wins and they get like 0.3 or negative 0.2. And then he's, DFA'd in July, like thinking like Adam Eaton and Jeff Keppinger and all these, just these terrible 1-year deals that have amounted to nothing. Nomar Mazara was another one. There's everybody they've put in the right field. John Jay. Todd Frazier is the counterpoint to where like, he was like a 4 to 5 win player. He ended up being like a 2 to 3, kind of 3+ win guy with the White Sox, like one of the more unsatisfying 40 homer seasons you'll have. But because he had that upside, even a disappointing season was okay for them. Like that's kind of how I feel like the White Sox have to think about position players, because when they try to get that okay guy, Cesar Hernandez, another one, for whatever reason, the production just tends to disappear. So that's why I wouldn't be excited. Not necessarily anything Segura does or Andrus does, but just because of historically the way the White Sox have identified talent. Like that talent seems to evaporate, and even when they move on to other teams, it's just gone.
Yeah, and so if you are not crazy about Segura and you're not crazy about Andrus, those are the best remaining middle infielders in free agency for everyone, including for White Sox targets. When you look at the outfield, I've mentioned Benintendi. The next best available is Michael Conforto. Steamer thinks that Conforto's a 1.6 WAR season. It's really hard to project what Conforto's going to do in 2023 because he missed all of 2022 due to a shoulder injury. And then you got Michael Brantley. Speaking of shoulder problems, he's next in the list when it comes to outfielders at 1.4 according to the Steamer projection. Steamer likes him as a bat. A projected OPS of 761, and the White Sox could use more left-handed bats. But if they go back to that well that I advocated for 3 years ago, Jim, that moves Eloy Jimenez from the DH spot to the outfield, and that creates problems. Two names that have been pitched to us from our Veterans Committee, so our VIPs on Patreon, they get an opportunity, by the way, to be in a chat group with Jim and I, and we text all the time. So you got Pete Hand, and Pete threw out the name Jackie Bradley Jr. as like not a great fit, but a very White Sox way of addressing the outfield is citing someone like Jackie Bradley Jr. Great on defense, can't hit anymore, but he can at least help defensively. And then we also got the other suggestion as well for Jurickson Profar. What do you make of Profar as a possibility for the White Sox?
It kind of falls in the same boat in terms of just like it's a profile that just doesn't have any real strength. Like the walks shot up last year. He drew 73 of them. Like he's always had a decent eye. So I guess that would be his most reliable strength, but the batting average fluctuates on him. Doesn't have a ton of power. Like he peaked just like everybody else at 20 homers in 2019. And the power has been less impressive since. But he's all right, especially if you consider him not much of an infielder anymore and just think of him mainly as an outfielder. He can solve a position. I think the one thing I look at his track record and you look at his wins total or his WAR total. He seems to have really a Reggie Sanders type thing, a Brett Saberhagen type thing, who predated Sanders in terms of every other year he's good. And the other year is terrible. Like I'm looking at his wins total, like 2017, replacement level 0.0, 2018, 1.7, 2019, negative 0.1. 2020 in 56 games, 1.3, really good season. 2021, 0.0. 2022, 3.1. So finally, like the kind of year that everybody thought he might have when he was a top prospect. But if that trend holds, then 2023 is going to be another just hot potato left just holding the bag for a guy who just oscillates between great aromas and terrible ones. If you're thinking about the fan, just what that's providing. So yeah, again, a little bit, I guess not based entirely on numbers, just more of a feel for how the White Sox do things and just the kind of signing. But I would want to think a little more upside, but better than what the White Sox have, addresses a weakness that the White Sox persistently deal with in terms of just struggling to draw walks. And I would be more open to it than I think it would excite me a little bit more than Segura or Andrews, just because of that one strength he does provide.
I know we're grasping at straws here, listeners and watchers, for the White Sox, but this is just the reality of the market. Usually, you still have some premium free agents available when you get into January or maybe even February, like Manny Machado and Bryce Harper. They didn't sign until late January, early February. I think Bryce Harper may have signed when spring training had already started. That's when he finally signed with the Philadelphia Phillies. That's not the case this year. The market has been moving very quickly. You're down to, when you look at the position player front, you're down to Dansby Swanson. And then after Swanson, the best available position player free agents are going to be Gene Segura, Andrew Benintendi. Omar Narvaez just signed with the Mets. So the next on the list is like Elvis Andrews, Justin Turner, question marks like Michael Conforto and Joey Gallo and Michael Brantley. Like the well is starting to dry up. And if the White Sox are going to make a move, they're going to have to make a move pretty soon to address the outfield. Or if they're going to make a trade, good luck. Because I think the teams right now, especially the other contenders, they're starting to see the well dry up and they may be pivoting. Some teams have already pivoted to the trade market, like the Atlanta Braves getting Sean Murphy. We didn't even talk about that. The Braves making a big trade there, a 3-team trade along with Milwaukee and Oakland. There's that Milwaukee team again, continuing to make trades and making trades happen, not waiting out the market as they continue to throw shade at Rick Hahn and his offseason strategy. They're not going to be able to wait another month. The White Sox are going to have to do something, I assume, before Christmas, which is just 10 days away, and no later than January 1st to address the outfield. Or they're just going to, again, the well could dry up on the White Sox here pretty quickly, and then we're having real conversations of Eloy Jimenez or Gavin Sheets is going to have to be the opening day left fielder, and Lenyn Sosa is probably your opening day second baseman, along with another rookie, Oscar Colas, being your opening day right fielder. And that is a pretty big risk the White Sox are taking going to 2023, Jim.
Yeah. Is there anything more?
No, that's well stated.
Yeah. The reality in the White Sox, it's funny. I went to the whitesox.com and the headline on, not the Scott Merkin story because it's a different headline, but the headline showing on the homepage is White Sox, quote unquote, patient and quote unquote diligent this offseason. And yeah. And patience, it feels like a euphemistic way to, present inaction. And, in the group chat, we're talking and just it seemed like all these moves being made, and it seems like Rick Hahn is just, as we've talked about, as I've written about, such a high leverage offseason. Now it appears pretty precious few resources. So they kind of have to be used right. And I think Mike Clevenger has shown to be like an okay move based on the way the pitching market is really inflated in price. Like I feel okay with that one, but it seems like the next move, whether it's, using the money they have left or trading Liam Hendriks, they have to like make sure these moves are right. So just, I can picture him like trying to jump on the carousel that's like moving faster than he wants. And just like every time the spot comes around, he like lunges forward a little bit, but then pulls himself back. Like he'll wait for the next turn, and just eventually, the ride's going to be over, and he'll not have enjoyed it, which I guess makes him like everybody else when it comes to enjoying the ride. But yeah, that's kind of how I'm looking at it. Is just eventually either he's got to make a move, or the White Sox are going to go back to spinning how. Once these guys come back from injury, it's like we made additions, and the trade deadline is, we're going to be next looking to add, which he said before.
Yes. Yeah. The carousel metaphor really works, Jim, because he's already been caught missing the ride this past trade deadline. And all he got in return was Jake Diekman. And yeah, Jake Diekman's still on the roster. Disappointing, but there's been a lot of activity so far this Major League Baseball offseason. It's been very entertaining to see how the other teams are adding, and we'll see what the White Sox do. But at least there are teams making moves. It has not been a very boring offseason. The action and the news trickling in has been consistent. That might mean a quieter January than recent years in the offseason. But hopefully the White Sox finally enter the fray, because, again, the well's starting to dry up at free agency, and we'll see on just how tempted the Pittsburgh Pirates will be in trying to move Brian Reynolds, and maybe just how tempted Rick Hahn will be if he continues to get phone calls about Liam Hendriks. But that will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine Podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening and watching as well on our YouTube page, which, by the way, if you do watch videos on YouTube, we're really inching closer to 1,000 subscribers. So thanks to everyone that subscribed in the past week, as I saw our count is now in the low 800s, which is fantastic. Thank you for doing that. If you do watch videos on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel at youtube.com/SoxMachine. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, as long as that lasts, at Sox Machine, and you can follow me on Twitter at SoxMachine_Josh. If you don't get a chance to watch the videos on YouTube, or you prefer to listen to the podcast version of the shows, you can still listen and subscribe to the Sox Machine Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. If you enjoy our work and you want more, you can help support us at patreon.com/SoxMachine, where our Patreon supporters get exclusive content. They get ad-free versions of both the podcast and the website. And thanks to our new Sox Machine store, they are the first ones to receive the new swag. So we have monthly plans starting at $2, or you can save with an annual subscription. Again, sign up at patreon.com/SoxMachine. The Sox Machine Podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com, your home for all things Chicago White Sox baseball, and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening.